Hello everyone, Salam, Namaste, Adab, and welcome to today's event. Today we are going to have a very sensitive theme, two-level games of Hindu-Muslim dialogue in India. Professor Muqtedar Khan, who is now, I'm sure, well known to our audience, he is going to talk on this theme. He's a professor of political science and international relations at University of Delaware. And the opening remarks will be given by Dr. Amirullah Khan, who will introduce the theme as well as the speaker, and the closing remarks by our own Dr. Nazir Ahmed Sahab, who is basically a core part or core member of our Washington diaspora. And welcome you all. Now over to Dr. Amirullah Khan Sahab. Please take care.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Razi Bhai, for starting this event. And I must thank Muqtedar for including me in this really critical discussion. And what I have to say right in the beginning is just a very brief couple of things. Firstly, how important this dialogue is, and why is it important for us to look at Hindu-Muslim relationships today, the dialogues between the two, how the two look at each other. Whatever I say about it is not enough, and I'm sure this audience understands that better than everybody else. But what I want to highlight just a couple of things. Firstly, that it is most appropriate that we have Muqtedar discussing this issue, because Muqtedar has an insight that is unique, an insight that is at once scholarly and contemporary, and what comes from looking at this issue purely as an objective insider, outsider. So Muqtedar therefore combines a variety of views that will go into understanding this issue in its entirety. People like me are handicapped because we are right here in the midst of what's going on, and very often we are we fail to see the woods from the trees and realize it much later. And therefore, the first point is that we couldn't have had this at a better time, and we couldn't have had somebody like Muqtedar speaking on this issue, because he is seeing it from a vantage point that combines everything that we need to understand this issue better. The second point that I want to highlight is a point that some of us who are looking at Indian politics afresh are looking at with great amazement, and we are still unable to come to terms with that. And that is the fact that historically, over the last 13, 14 national federal elections, the constant refrain has been that Indian voter is divided into several vote banks of various minorities. There is the famous Dalit vote bank, there is the Yadav vote bank, there is the vote bank of the Jat in around Delhi, and there is of course the Muslim vote bank. And the success of the Congress was always blamed on a very successful engineering of the Muslim scheduled caste, scheduled tribe vote bank, which roughly constitute about 30%, 35% of the population. 2014 was the first time that we got wind of this new development, which was a Hindu vote bank. And for the first time, we had voters who were not identifying themselves by their caste identities, but who were now voting for the Hindu. It was a small little beginning. We missed it in 2014, but by 2019, it was pretty clear. And what is inexplicable and what is baffling most of us looking at India's entrenched caste hierarchies is how could this so quickly disappear and coalesce into a broader identity of at least half the Hindu population of the country, which so assiduously votes for the likes of Mr. Yogi and Mr. Modi, who are unabashedly upper caste and who have time and again not just said it but also executed policies that are clearly anti-lower caste and anti-women. But they have in their uh, in their engineering ensured that a large 50% nearly of the Muslim of the Hindu vote is firmly with them. And what it did was clearly that moved away completely from caste to religion. So while the BJP would arguably look for the Sikh vote and the Christian vote at one time, today it only looks at the Hindu vote, but Hindu of all kinds. So that is the interesting thing that has happened. The silver lining, however, is that 50% of the Hindu vote is still not with the BJP. And therefore, the importance of this dialogue to understand what that 50% thinks. Why is that 50% not voting for a majoritarian constitution that purports to be uh, unabashedly pro-Hindu? And that is the reason why I am very excited with this dialogue, because it allows us to understand or allows us a little window into a possibly bright future where the Hindu decides that the idea of India is an inclusive secular country and not a homogeneous Hindu Hindustan that is the slogan that we are hearing over the last 8 years. So those are the only couple of things that I thought I will contribute. The beauty of having an audience such as this is that there is nothing in terms of fact that you don't know. You are all, even if you're sitting far away from India, you're all so very well versed with what is happening here, so concerned about what is going on there. So there's nothing really by way of fact that I'm sure you know of what happened today in Delhi and in Hyderabad. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to say that Professor Muqtedar Khan, someone who I have known, I'm sure, in this audience for the longest time. I've known Muqtedar for more than 35 years now. Always very brutally honest, always based on or making arguments based on clear evidence and scholarship, and having developed a way of looking at the Muslim world that helps us understand the various nuances of what is happening in geopolitics across the globe. And now, increasingly, Muqtedar has, and thanks to him for having done so, started looking at India very closely. So thanks, Muqtedar, for doing this, and I hand it over back to you.
Thank you. All right. Give me 1 second, folks, so that I can pull up.
Yeah, I thought I'd spoken long enough for you to organize everything.
No, I was I was kind of thinking what's going on. So give me 1 second. I'm trying to pull up my video and as a result of that. But I want to thank Amer for setting it up so beautifully, and has saved me from having to deal with some of the details of what's the background for this important discussion. I also want to thank Radhi Saab and the Washington diaspora for hosting me This is the second time I'm speaking here. I'm very happy to be with you all. And as Nazir Saab was saying, before we began, that this is perhaps one of the most engaged and one of the most intellectual forums, at least in the US, that reflects consistently on India and Indian Muslim issues. I want to thank both Amer and who is a childhood friend, and Dr. Nazir Ahmed, who has very quickly become a mentor to me, and who guides me on how to deal with community issues and how to present my ideas. I'm very grateful that they have agreed to bookend my talk today. So what I want to do basically is to make some very obvious points, which even though they are obvious, are often ignored. Number one, I'm working under the assumption that the 200 million Muslims in India wish to live in India in harmony and peace with the majority community. They want to be treated as equal citizens. They want to have freedom of religion, and they want to essentially have their dignity unharmed. They are also interested in preserving their culture. They're also interested in preserving their heritage, which is their present as well as their past. And like everybody else, they want to live in peace and security. And I feel that any minority in any country, and for that matter, Indian Muslims in India, cannot live in peace without winning the heart and minds of the majority community. I don't like the word tolerance. It means, it's like saying, I don't like you, I wish you were not here, but since I'm such a good person, I'm going to tolerate you here. So I just don't like that word. So I'm not going to say that we need to be tolerant towards each other. That's not the point. What I do want to know is that Indian Muslims want to be respected, want to be included, and want to be part of it. But there's also this whole business that if you want to be part of it, then you have to be part of it. So it's not that the others include you, but you also include yourself. So those are some of the basic assumptions under which I'm operating. And what I will be using today is something that is called as two-level games. It's a part of game theory. It's a very famous article that was published in 1988 in the international organization. It's called Diplomacy in Domestic Politics, The Logic of Two-Level Games. Robert Putnam is a very, very famous professor of political science, taught at Harvard. He also wrote a very famous book called Bowling Alone, which made him like a superstar in the United States. And he talked about how basically about America's domestic politics. And he makes this observation after being part to some international negotiations and said that international dialogue does not necessarily just happen between countries. There are two dimensions to this international dialogue. And so I will be using this framework as a theoretical context for my conversation. But before that, I want to make a couple of points. I have a YouTube channel called Conversations, where I am actually conducting a dialogue with a lot of people who are from the majority community in India. And you can see how the dialogue is progressing from video to video. It's fascinating. They started by hating me, but listening to me. Now they concede that I'm making thoughtful observations, even though they don't like some of the points of view that I bring to the table, but they are actually conceding that it's an important voice and they would like to listen. So please subscribe to Conversations. It doesn't cost anything, and try to watch the videos. And even if you don't watch the videos, at least read the comments that I'm receiving from people in India. I think that India is experiencing a clash of visions. And those two clashes are very simply the India of Muslim dreams and the India of Hindutva dreams. There's another India there, the India of the dreams of those Hindus who are not part of Hindutva, the 50% that Amer was referring to. Essentially, we have two or three visions of India which are out there, which are competing for ascendance. And I think that it is important for us to have a dialogue between these visions. And that is important. If if my Hindu neighbor has a dream of India, which does not appeal to me, then I'm not coming along, I'm not contributing to realization of that dream. I might even become a hurdle to that. And the opposite also applies. If I have a dream of India, what kind of vision I have, and if my neighbors do not find it appealing, then they will become hurdles and barriers. So both of us are going to fail. But in order for us to be able to assess the value of each other's imaginations of India, in order for each of us to be able to assess the quality and value of each other's visions, it is important that we at least communicate what our vision is. And fortunately, we do have clarity on the kind of India the Hindutva movement wants. An India where Hindu religion, Hindu culture, and Indian nationalism are all one, and where Islam and Muslims are invisible, both in the present as well as in the past. So they want to play some magic tricks and not only make Muslims disappear in the present, but also make Islam disappear from India's past. And we also have a vision of Indian Muslims, which is where I think it remains underdeveloped. We are now appreciating what we did not appreciate before the rise of Hindutva. We want Nehru's secular, pluralistic, and democratic India. So today, suddenly, we have a vision of India which is secular, democratic, and pluralistic. I think that this is, at the moment, in my view, it's a shallow claim. And as we go along, you will understand why I am making that assertion up front. All right, so first, what is a two-level game? A two-level game essentially assumes that when parties are negotiating, they also have internal disagreements. And therefore, they're not just negotiating with the other side, but they're also negotiating positions within themselves. So for example, if Biden is having a negotiation, say, with Israel on Israel's role in the Middle East, he is also going to have a dialogue at home with those who are uncritically supportive of Israel and those who are very, very critical of Israel. So because there is a division in the country, in the United States, Biden cannot just unilaterally decide what should be the United States position with regards to Israel. So what Biden will need to do is to first negotiate the American position with both sides at home, and then he will negotiate that with Israel. So in the Indian context, what happens is that you cannot have a Hindu-Muslim dialogue until you have a Hindu position and a Muslim position, and I submit to you that there isn't one. So basically, what we need to do is we will need to have 3 dialogues and not 1 dialogue. Those 3 dialogues are, one is an internal dialogue between secular and Hindutva Hindus as to what is the Hindu position. Who represents the Hindus? Is it Rajiv Gandhi, who's probably not a Hindu, and some other secular Hindu leader? Or is it RSS or BJP? Who represents the Hindu voice? As we know from polling that the Hindu vote, at least politically, is half and half. So essentially, you do have 2 sides of the Hindu community of India, and they need to have a dialogue, and they are having a dialogue. I'm often a participant on the Satya Hindi show, a digital platform, where the Hindu hosts, who are very, very secular and very, very democratic, often engage in dialogue with representatives of either RSS or BJP. And I can see the Hindu dialogue taking place about the future of India, what kind of India they want to live in. And of course, on many of these occasions, there aren't many Muslim voices. The Muslim voices only appear when there is, quote unquote, a Muslim issue. And then I don't see a Muslim-Muslim dialogue. Clearly, there isn't one Muslim voice. There isn't one Muslim position. I get so many WhatsApp messages saying that Owaisi is the B team of Narendra Modi. And then I see thousands and thousands of Muslims go and support him, vote for him. And when he has an event, hundreds of thousands of people show up. So clearly there are many Muslims on his side and many Muslims who seem to be very critical of his political role. But I don't see a dialogue between these Muslims. I just see them sending nasty messages on WhatsApp and social media. So one of the things that is missing, I think, in India at the moment is a national forum where there can be a dialogue. Those who supported the Babri Masjid and fought for it very hard, took positions which were, I'm not very sure, representative of the positions that all Indian Muslims would have liked to take. So some organizations took upon themselves to take political positions and they went to courts based on that. But we never had an intra-Muslim dialogue on how we should respond to the Babri Masjid challenge. I mean, now that the mosque is gone, the land is also gone, and now some people are acknowledging that perhaps the positions taken by those who went to court on that issue were wrong. Faizan Mustafa, the professor of law from Hyderabad, who has a YouTube show, has talked extensively on this particular issue. But have we learned from that? So now we have the Gyanwapi Mosque issue. And what is the Indian Muslim position on it? Should we leave to those couple of organizations which are there near the mosque to take a position that represents us? What is there a dialogue among Indian Muslims on how to respond to these consistent challenges? Yes, people have lots of opinions and they seem to think that their opinion is consensual, that everybody else thinks like that. Well, I have news for you. I don't think like that. This assumption that, oh, if we give one mosque, they will take all mosques. This is a very strange position. We have no evidence to that contrary. Yes, they have a list. Maybe they have a list of 1, maybe they have a list of 2, maybe they have a list of 3,000. Yes, we need to talk, and that's a good number. That's where the bargaining can begin. So the question really is that one of the reasons why we don't have a robust and a meaningful Hindu-Muslim dialogue is because there is no intra-Muslim dialogue in India taking place. And I think this is where American Muslims of Indian origin who really care about India and India's future can play a role by hosting an intra-Muslim dialogue. We can host this in India, we can host this here. I would recommend Switzerland. I've never been there. So we can bring Muslims from India to Switzerland and bring all the leaders, hold them there for a week and have an intra-dialogue, discuss key issues, which I will identify some of the key issues during the course of this presentation. But that is a weakness. So what happens as a result of that is that the Hindu majority community gets to choose who they will dialogue with, because there are no representatives, legitimate representatives who are there to advance. So I don't understand why the chairman of the Muslim Personal Law Board gets to speak on behalf of Indian Muslims, or for that matter, some random MP who is available at the time, a particular television channel had a need for a shouting Muslim on their screen. So who are these people who are speaking? So from an infrastructure point of view, there is an absence of a dialogue infrastructure in India. There is no ongoing structured dialogue between Hindus and Muslims, and there is no structured dialogue between Muslims themselves. There is clearly a dialogue taking place between Hindus about the future of India. It revolves around the role of secularism. It revolves around the role of religion in politics. It revolves around the role of democracy. So you can see that there is a dialogue taking place, and it is not as structured as, say, I would like to see, but it would be great if we could have an institute for national dialogue where all of these things happen. It is possible to do something like this. Somebody like Amirullah Khan could probably have a demonstrative institute in Hyderabad where you could bring in Muslims from different perspectives. And let me tell you, they are profoundly different. The last time I spoke in this forum was on the madrasa issue, which Amir was also part of it. And there were people in the audience who basically says, why do we care? Why do we care about madrasa? They wanted them gone. So there are Muslims out there who have very strong opinions. They might be resourceful and even influential in the community. So we need to be able to have a dialogue. And let me tell you that the dialogue has also lots of byproducts, which is it increases the knowledge base of the community, it increases the engagement of community, and it also makes the representatives and leaders more informed about the various positions that they wish to take. It is quite possible that Muslim leaders who are from a particular economic background may not understand the concerns of Muslims who are from a marginalized background. If they're not included in the dialogue, the positions taken by rich and safe Muslims on behalf of all Indian Muslims might not actually serve the interests of all Indian Muslims. So this is an important structure of the dialogue. We really need to recognize that it's not just a dialogue between Hindus and Muslims, but it's a three-way dialogue where Hindus and Muslims are dialoguing, but before that, you need to have a Muslim-Muslim dialogue and a Hindu-Hindu dialogue. So that is what the two-level games are all about. So what are the modalities of the dialogue? How will this dialogue occur? Very simply, very broadly, what language will this dialogue take place? The Hindu-Hindu dialogue, will it be in Shuddh Hindi or English? If Hindus from Delhi are talking to Hindus from Chennai, and I don't know what, how will the dialogue between Muslims take place? Now, I'm merely suggesting that these can be the modalities for dialogue. I think I have made this repeatedly clear in the past that Muslims in the diaspora should not take positions on behalf of Indian Muslims. I can recommend to you, I can suggest to you, it is for you who lives under the shadow of Hindu nationalism to decide how to move forward. So I think if you're looking at the intra-Muslim dialogue, you have to ask the question that should be overriding is about maslaha. Maslaha is essentially an Arabic term for public interest. Public interest, justice, and excellence. These are the three criteria that should determine what is the best vision for India. So Indian Muslims, when they dialogue about India, they should not ask the question, what is in it for us and for us alone? No, they need to have a broader perspective. What is in it for minorities? What is it in it for Hindus also? And why will they buy a product which does not serve their interests? So it is an important modality of dialogue where you can use Islamic logic. You can refer to the Quran, you can refer to the Hadith literature, you can refer to Islamic scholars and the justifications that they have provided for various things. I find it quite surprising that the idea of composite nationalism, which was advanced by Indian Muslim scholars at the time of the partition, is not often referred to today. In an intra-Muslim dialogue, perhaps that could be a starting point for discussion of the kind of India Indian Muslims want to live in. So I think the modality for the dialogue can be whatever you like, what is in the interest. I don't know what Indian Muslims care about. Maybe they want to talk about what is in the interest of Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or whatever, or Afghanistan, or how do we impose Sharia in India? There are political parties there whose goals are to establish an Islamic state in India. So whatever the goal is, you need to have a dialogue and then come up with a position and say, and I understand fully that you're not going to have 100% agreement, but you need to have a position which you can say that a significant segment of the Muslim community, a vast majority of Indian Muslims will back this position. what will be the intra-Hindu dialogue? Will it be based on reason or will it be based on dharma niti? I leave it to Hindus to decide. But from the dialogues that I have witnessed and seen and heard and even been a part of, it is very interesting that the Hindu community, while it does refer to Hindu values and Hindu culture, essentially argues in pretty simple, rational terms. The goal identification is cultural in the sense they have a, when they decide what they want, they use cultural metaphors from India as an ancient India is a quote which says that India is originally Hindu, and so on and so forth. So there are these cultural sources for identification of goals, but when it comes to discussion of how these goals should be achieved, etc., it is a pretty rational debate, and therefore I'm able to follow those debates. And so they talk about what is good for India, what is good for Indians, etc. And one of the things that I have found, which is striking, and I would advise Indian Muslims to pay a much closer attention to what I'm going to say now, that when Hindus debate among themselves, often the question is what is best for India. Doesn't matter who is the voice, whether it's Hindutva or secular Hindu. But when Muslims are debating among themselves, I'm not very sure the question, the uppermost question on their minds is what is best for India. The question really is sometimes what is best for Islam, as if Islam needs something from India. But often it is what is best for Indian Muslims. So there is a difference in modality. And I think as long as Indian Muslims continue to have answers and questions which revolve around only what is best for Indian Muslims, they are not going to be part of the national dialogue because they have nothing to offer to Hindus who are debating what is not just best for the Hindu community, but also debating what is best for India. And that is one of the biggest differences in modalities. And please don't give me analogical or anecdotal examples of how you told your cousin and your aunt and your kids that I am interested in what is best for India. Show me a national level discussion among Indian Muslims where they are asking this question, what is best for Indian Muslims, for India? So that is an important part that I want to make. And I think that is the key question that both Muslims and Hindus should be debating in their internal dialogue, and they should be also then coming. So use whatever logic, use whatever sources you want to use to come up with the answer of what is best for India, and then come to the national forum. Idealistically, I think the way you could solve the Hindu-Muslim problem is if Indian Muslims could advance a vision of India that Hindus love. So if you stand up there and say, I have a dream speech, I, Indian Muslim, have a dream, and in that dream, I see India as Fulan, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the characteristics of the India of my dream. And I want the Hindu to say, wow, I love it. It's better than what I have in mind. I'm putting my dream aside. I want to live in your dream. All right, let me move to my next point. My next point is about the issues. So from my limited dialogue with Hindus on various forums in the last year and a half, and also reading some of the works. In fact, just yesterday, I bought 2 new books. One is The Essence of Hindutva by Savarkar, and The Idea of Justice by Amartya Sen. I want to see what these 2 prominent Hindu intellectuals have to say about India. So the issues that agitate Hindutva and Hindutva-related Muslims are the way they see the past. They see the past, especially of Muslim rule, as a legacy of invasions and destructions of temples and looting of Indian civilization and oppression by Hindu Muslim rulers who imposed their religion and their religious laws on us. And therefore, you can see how they zero in on Aurangzeb, etc. So there is an issue of the past legacy of invasion. Even on this matter of India's historical past, the debate is between Hindus, between so-called leftist secular historians and then right-wing historians who are just emerging. So the past is also, India Muslim past is also being debated mostly by Hindus. There are a few voices. Professor Akhil, who was here a couple of weeks ago, is an important voice. There is an Indian professor called Muzaffar Alam, who is at the University of Chicago, who had a very low public profile, but his scholarship is profound and probably the best scholar of the Mughals. So there is this debate, and it is important for us to be able to have a dialogue directly with Hindutva on these issues and deconstruct their images. And it does. There's one thing that I want to tell people, that this is something that we see in interfaith dialogues too. The purpose of dialogue is to not only present your point of view, but also to listen and try to understand the other side's point of view. It is not like an interfaith. People go to interfaith in the hope of converting the other. They think it's a dawa exercise. No, that's not the point. So when you go to have a dialogue with Hindus, try to understand how they see their past. Don't tell them how they should respond to the things that they have learned about their past. Just as it's like talking to somebody who is a Modi fan and saying, Indian Muslims are great. They're doing fantastic. Look at other Muslims all over the world. So just as you don't want a Hindutva spokesperson to speak on behalf of Indian Muslims and tell the world how they feel, you should also extend the same courtesy to Hindu nationalists who are suffering from some kind of perception of the past as oppressive. Have a dialogue. Of course, these are politicized issues. The cow slaughter, the fact that Muslims eat cows, and the fact that Hindus worship cows, the perception that Muslims are trying to convert Hindus to Islam, the trauma of partition, the perception that, look, they wanted a country, they got it, now why are they here? Why are they trying to impose upon us things? In fact, many people who wanted a Pakistan have stayed back, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of things there that we need to talk about. When I talk to them, I'm constantly surprised as to how much they talk about so-called Islamic terrorism. And to give you an example, I had a very extensive discussion with, I don't know the person, he got in touch with me, and so I talked to him, and he kept using the word Islamic terror. I said, where is the terrorism in India? And then he points to the killing of Kanhaiya Lal in Rajasthan and gives me two other names that I forget right now, about how Muslims in the last 2 or 3 months have killed Hindus. And he says, this is terrorism. You don't see it as terrorism, but for us it is terrorism. So that was very interesting. And he also made a very interesting point to me, which kind of stumped me. He said, you talk a lot about democracy in your videos and human rights. I would like to see American Muslims marching in Washington, D.C., threatening to cut the head off Salman Rushdie. He insulted the Prophet. I want to see you taking a julus out in Washington, D.C. and in New York City and saying, Sar tan se juda kar denge. Do that and then tell me about American democracy. Tell me what happens to you. So yes, you can imagine very clearly, if a bunch of Muslims go out there threatening to chop the head off of Salman Rushdie, they will immediately be labeled as terrorists. And you can imagine how the US law enforcement is going to respond to that particular march. And he says, the fact that they are able to do so in India shows that Indian Muslims have more freedom to such an extent that they can threaten to kill and murder people in this country. They have more freedom than those in America. So it was for me a point of view that I had never thought of. And we keep talking here about imminent genocide as if the genocide is about to begin as soon as my talk gets over, or it might have already started by now. and we don't look at the other side of it at all. There also talks about entitlements like the Hajj subsidy, which leads to the point that if India is a secular state, then why are you guys taking Hajj subsidy? You want India to be secular? Good. Stop taking the Hajj subsidy. That's another point that they make. And of course, the talk about UCC, the universal, the civil code, uniform civil code, which is directive principle in the Indian Constitution. And there are lots of misunderstandings about the UCC when I listen to both Muslims and other commentators talk about. It also talk about crime. And then the latest issue is the madrasas. The UP government is about to conduct a survey, and there are so much of misgivings. It took me a long time to find out what the questionnaire is going to be. Like, what are the questions that the UP government is trying to seek? And it is very clearly that they want to find out who are the people who are going to fund the madrasas. And then there is this opinion that then the UP government will then threaten those who are funding the madrasas in order to cut off the funding from madrasas. We have not had a dialogue. Amir was here at ISNA convention where we talked about the madrasa issue at one of the forums, and only 4% of Indian Muslims children attend the madrasa. So why is that a big issue for Indian Muslims? I don't understand. In fact, I would love to understand why are we stuck upon this and not about the horrible quality of education the rest of the 96% of Indian Muslim children are. Is it because it is a symbol of Islam, the madrasa? And then I'm told that the madrasa is nothing but a place where poor children live. Then change its name and call it a yatim khana. Why don't you call it a yatim khana? Why do you call it a madrasa? And also ask yourself, why is it a trigger? Why is the word madrasa a trigger? It's a very old thing. The British demonized madrasas because they taught Muslims jihad and they started fighting for independence. It goes back to over 200 years. And finally, the argument that Indian Muslims are very tolerant. This is a whole point of view that is advanced by Hindus. They give me the example of the movie PK, in which Amir Khan made fun of Hindu gods. And they say, none of us rioted. We didn't go kill anybody. And then you guys at the drop of the hat will go. Nupur Sharma said nothing new. She said, what is in your holy scriptures? All Nupur Sharma said was what is in Sahih Bukhari, and you guys are threatening to kill her and hang her and so on. So these are some of the issues that Hindutva people have used as weapons against Muslims to create a Hindu voting bloc that Amar was talking about. It also creates a divide between the two communities. And unless they are addressed with them and engaged with their leaders, I don't think those misgivings are going to go away. Because even if you write in newspapers and if you have your own videos and challenges, they're not listening to it. So you're only singing to the choir. Now, as far as Muslims are concerned, these are the lists that I have put together. These are the issues. The most important issue for Indian Muslims right now is straight up security, violence, lynching, targeting. Their homes are being bulldozed. They are being lynched for what they eat. They are unable to do simple things, especially the poor Muslims are unable to even sell tomatoes in neighborhoods which are supposedly majority communities, places they can't buy homes. There is a forcible segregation taking place. So this is an immediate threat. There are people out there who are calling for a genocide of Indian Muslims and are getting away with it. So there is, even though there may not be egregious violence taking place now, the memory of Gujarat, the memory of Muzaffar, the Delhi riots that took place just a few years ago, all of those are very, very prominent. The passage of the law CAA and the fear that in combination with NRC, CAA will completely disenfranchise Muslims and take them away or basically undermine their citizenship. There is also the issue of economic integration. Muslims are falling behind. India is growing as an economic power. Adani is now the second richest man. Just last week, he was the third richest. So the Indian community is becoming rich and prosperous, where Indian Muslims are being left behind. They are now not even as good as those who have been marginalized for thousands of years. There are issues of development assistance from the government. There are issues of reducing representation of Muslims in political arena, fewer Muslims in the parliament, fewer Muslims in bureaucracies, fewer Muslims in law enforcement. And so while the Muslim population is growing, Muslim representation is declining. These are serious concerns for Muslims. It show that there is structural discrimination in India, which we need to bring to the table, and it has to be addressed. The Sachar Commission report settled this debate about the status of Indian Muslims, and subsequent reports and analysis that followed. There's no dispute that the Indian Muslim community is the most underdeveloped, backward, and poor community in India, and that needs to be addressed. A country cannot move forward with policies that systematically exclude one particular minority, and it hurts the minority, but it also hurts the country as a whole. There are issues of Muslim educational institutions. Aligarh Muslim University, even though it's called Aligarh Muslim University, is by law now 50%, I think, only Muslims. So there are discussions, there are resentment and anger and frustration on the Muslim educational institution. The madrasa issue also falls. Muslims can't understand why madrasas, which are so marginal even to Muslim life. I would never send my children to madrasas. I don't support any madrasas. I have only one cousin who went to madrasa because his parents think that if he had memorized the Quran, they are going to heaven. It's a strange belief. And so only one person I know in my family who's been to a madrasa. And he's the poorest guy, often without a job. He has brothers who are doctors and engineers, and they make a lot of money. And it is a tragedy that a choice that his parents made has left him in poverty for decades. And then there is the issue of Muslim personal law and the Uniform Civil Code, which Muslims fear as erosion of identity. I personally am totally puzzled with this Muslim personal law obsession. It is a very tiny issue. It focuses only on inheritance, marriage, and divorce. And the fact that I'm actually disgusted that Muslims have reduced Islam to polygamy and divorce, and just that's it. If Muslims really believe in Sharia, so let them have the full Sharia. Let us cut people's hands off when they commit theft. So why not have a legal system in India where when Muslims commit crimes, we apply the Sharia to them? No, we don't want that. And when Muslims say they don't want criminal Sharia law, that tells me that this is not about Sharia. Because the Quran is very, very clear. You can't take Islam piecemeal. You can't tell God that, okay, I'll pray only Fajr and then I don't like Zohar because I'm hungry at that time, so I will never pray Zohar. It doesn't work that way. So the fact that I don't think that Muslim personal law has anything to do with Islam. It is a strange identity marker that Indian Muslims have stuck to. Then they think that by retaining the Muslim personal law, that somehow Islamic identity is preserved. No, some shady practices have been preserved, and the absence of an intra-Muslim dialogue persists. There have been reforms in the Hindu personal law, especially with regards to inheritance as well as marriage. And so Muslims haven't progressed on that issue at all. And I was reading one of the triple talaq case, and I was stunned that the Muslim Personal Law Board actually conceded that the Sharia frowns upon that triple talaq. It is not something that the Sharia advocates, and yet they wanted to stick to it. It is a very strange thing. We need to have a serious intra-Muslim dialogue. And I think the objection to a uniform civil code is not just going to come from conservative Muslims, but it's also going to come from a conservative Hindu background too. So if we were to have the kind of dialogue I'm suggesting, we will find this very peculiar situation where more modernized and more liberal Muslims and more modernized and more secular Hindus will be aligned against conservative Hindus and conservative Muslims who both might want to preserve personal laws of their respective communities. And that would be a good thing because it will deconstruct the Hindu-Muslim divide. And so there are many benefits. You don't have to agree with me. You may think that Muslim personal law is the most important thing. इसके बगैर तो हम मुसलमान ही नहीं रहेंगे. अमेरिका में रहो या बर्तानिया में रहो. India में Muslim personal law होना चाहिए. You can believe that, that's fine with me, but we need to have a dialogue about it and see if your position is tenable based on rationality or even Islamic values. And if it is not, then you should back off and not advance something which is un-Islamic and basically irrational. And one final point that I do also want to make is that Muslims in America live under a uniform civil code, and they don't seem to have problems. These same Indian Muslims who migrate to the US have no problems living under a uniform civil code, have no problem living in a country where polygamy is forbidden. But they insist on having that right in India. A poor community which can barely afford to protect its families wants to have polygamy. And finally, this idea of India as secular and democratic nature. I hear more and more Indian Muslims suddenly talking about the virtues of secularism. We need to ask ourselves, do we really believe in it? Indian Muslims need to have the question, because when you talk about secularism, then the issue of the uniform civil code immediately pops up. So why can't a secular nation have uniform laws across the board? Why does religion come into the legal system? So these are the issues that people need to talk about. There is a lot of discussion. In fact, when I was searching for Muslim dialogues on the Uniform Civil Code, I found that it's only Faizan Ahmad who's having a dialogue with himself on these issues. And he's making some interesting points. And surprisingly, he's also making points which don't make sense. He seems to argue that in some cases, certain laws have not been implemented, and therefore, what's the point of having laws, which is quite strange coming from a lawyer. But nevertheless, these are some of the issues that we need to have. So basically, these are the 2 points I want to make, that we need to have a dialogue within the Muslim community on some of these issues. Maybe I'm wrong. These are not the most important issues. You have a better list of, good, bring your list of what are the key issues. We can begin the dialogue with that. Simultaneously, we begin a dialogue even with the Hindu-Muslim community. I think that one of the places where this Hindu-Muslim dialogue can take place much more safely and fruitfully is in the United States. And I think this should be the #1 priority of American Muslims who are of Indian origin, is to establish and institute an intra-Muslim dialogue and facilitate that in the Indian country, in the country of India, but also initiate a Muslim-Hindu dialogue here in the United States. So with that, I will stop, and we'll listen to Dr. Nazir Ahmed, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Professor Sahab, for this very lucid exposition of a very sensitive subject. I must confess, you have your own professorial way of entering into hot water. The contribution that you have made is that you have inserted mirrors behind each of the parties so that each party not only sees the mole on the other side's face, but the mole on one's face also. That's a contribution, so that you're able to see yourself and the other one too. Dialogue is about exploring the common good. The Hindu-Muslim dialogue is civilizational. It is multidimensional, and it embraces the spiritual, the cultural, the social, and the political. At the spiritual level, it becomes a dialectic and a shared search for the transcendent truth. Examples are the sublime poetry of Amir Khusro, the eclectic outreach of the Mughal Emperor Akbar, and the intellectual syncretism of Prince Dara Shikoh. Now, Islam spread in the subcontinent through the Sufi sheikhs, and Hinduism was resurrected through the Bhakti movement. The Sufi and Bhakti streams met on the Indo-Gangetic plains, amalgamated, learned from each other, and produced towering spiritual personages like Guru Nanak, Kabir, Tulsidas, and Bulleh Shah of Lahore. Akbar, in particular, established familial relations with the Rajputs, so much so that his grandson Shah Jahan was 3/4 Rajput by blood and 1/4 Mughal. Akbar's efforts to forge a Hindustani nation as a fusion of Hindus and Muslims was scuttled by later generations, leading to political disintegration and ultimate subjugation of India by foreign powers. However, it is not the dialectic of two great religious traditions of humankind, namely Hinduism and Islam, that is at the center stage in contemporary discourse. It is rather a political ideology, Hindutva, that claims to represent Hinduness. What is Hindutva? To answer this question, one must go to the source, namely the writings of Savarkar in his ideological treatise, Hindutva, Who is a Hindu. Savarkar makes an honest attempt to define who is a Hindu. He fails. It is as hard to define who is a Hindu as it is to define who is a Muslim or who is a Christian. So he postulates a new definition of Hinduness in terms of race and culture, a thesis that is historically unsupported and intellectually incoherent. India is an ancient and complex civilization. It is like a layered geological formation built up by eons of human interactions in the vast milieu of South Asia. Savarkar's definition fails to appreciate this. Golwalkar, who follows Savarkar, further refined Savarkar's ideas about Muslims and Christians. And he wrote on a quote, and we have to come to terms with it. The foreign races in Hindustan, meaning Muslims and Christians, must either adopt the Hindu culture and language, must learn to respect and hold in reverence Hindu religion, must entertain no idea but that of the glorification of the Hindu race and culture, that is, of the Hindu nation, and must lose their separate existence to merge in the Hindu race, or may stay in the country wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, far less any preferential treatment, not even citizen's rights. It is this abhorrent ideology that powers the engines of hate in India today. It manifests itself in demolitions, riots, lynching, hijab, azan controversies, arrests, imprisonments, auctioning off Muslim women from respectable families on the internet, open calls for mass extermination of Christians and Muslims. It is the antithesis of democracy, inclusiveness, and constitutionalism. One must emphasize that this is not a dialogue between Hindus and Muslims. Hindus and Muslims have lived with each other in peace for centuries and will continue to live with each other. It is a contest between a virulent political ideology and the rest of the world, which includes Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, Buddhists, capitalists, and communists, everyone who is opposed to it. Hindutva has been present here in America and now is raising its head in public space. On August 15, 2022, a bulldozer was paraded in Edison, New Jersey. Commenting on the event, the distinguished Professor Trushki wrote in the New Jersey Star Ledger on September 2nd, the bulldozer scandal is a wake-up call for people to learn about Hindutva hate. By targeting South Asian Muslims and Dalits, as well as Hindus who disagreed with them, Hindu nationalists in the United States are contributing to the alarming trend of hatred. If we are to confront and begin to counter such hateful assaults, we must recognize Hindutva's deep roots and long-standing harms in New Jersey. What is true of New Jersey is true of the United States of America. Hindutva hate is a challenge to civil society in America, as it is to democracy and inclusive society in India. One must take Hindutva at its word. It seeks nothing less than the disfranchisement and enslavement of 250 million people in South Asia or worse. A tragedy stares us in the face. The implications are enormous for the world. The antidote is for all people of goodwill to work together, including Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Sikhs, Buddhists, religious, secular, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and expose this toxic ideology for what it is, a challenge to civil society, and at the same time to create a countervailing force of world opinion. We can do nothing less for our children and grandchildren here in America, and we can do nothing less for civil society in India. Professor Muqtedar Khan and Dr. Amirullah Khan have done a great service in pinpointing certain aspects of this dialogue. I'm sure in the discussions to follow, we'll hear further elucidation of their thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nazir Saab. And thank you, Muqtedar Saab and Amirullah Khan Saab. It was a very realistic, to the point of kind of approach to initiate such dialogues. In fact, if you, okay, let me go before we make any comment. This is one other kind of dialogue. If you see the dialogue is only through the prism of only politics, that is not true. A better and bigger dialogue should be between two communities serving each other or taking a compositeness from each other. Here is the Muslim side talking about Radha, seeing the divine through the metaphor of Ishq, and Radha, Ishq Batni Ka Haqiqi Istihara. This going to be presented by Danish Iqbal along with the Lutf group of Delhi. They have presented a couple of times on this forum, and this will be a real event to watch, and how Urdu literature has given a shared composite things of India to the public, and how they see Radha and Krishna love in totality. So over to, before I move to question answer, our usual host, Dr. Rafat Hussain, is out of country. So I have requested Faisal to host this session for question answer. I'll just say a word that the dialogue has to be broader in sense. It is not between Hinduism or Islam at all. In India, the dialogue is between cultures, and a compositeness is at attack. Rather, a majoritarian concept, a false concept, is on the rise. And actually, a lot of secular Hindus are far more fighting than the Muslims. That is true. In India, Muslims never fought for a composite thing, at least post 1947. and they just had at the receiving end. But now they are siding with the secular and communist and left forces, and they are really doing a lot of work in India. People who are aware, they know about it. People who don't know about it, they don't want to also know about it. So let's move beyond this, have a question and answer session. Faisal is to take care about this. Faisal, please.
Thank you. Those who want to raise a question, please raise your digital hand or put in the chat. I am taking notes and I'll try to follow the sequence. Once again, please be brief. Do not put a whole lot of commentary. Come to your questions quickly. And I will start with a question that was posed in the chat by Mr. Porras. There were like 4 or 5 questions. So I'm going to just take the first 2 in the interest of time. The question is, where and what level of dialogue exists between Hindus and Muslim places of worship? And the second one is, we need more dialogue between the 2 communities in the USA, diversity dinners, celebrate festivals, open public meetings in libraries, etc. Who wants to take that question? Dr. Muqtedar? You're on mute.
I'm trying to understand the question. Where is the dialogue between secular and Hindutva Hindu? How many Muslims are opposed to Babri Mosque? See, the point is that we don't have that data at all for the second question about Babri Mosque. I don't know. We never asked the question. Did we do any surveys? No. So who's going to do the survey? So I don't know about that. But where is the dialogue between secular and Hindutva? I just mentioned one of the places where I see the dialogue is taking place is on Satya Hindi. Go to Lalan Top, go to News Laundry. News Laundry has a very interesting dialogue between secular Hindus and the Dharm Sansad people. In fact, they're very clear. I found it very fascinating as to how they are able to engage with them. And I also discovered that some of the secular Hindus in the Hindi belt have developed a very good methodology of engaging with Hindu nationalists on policy issues, on public policy issues, on political issues. So these dialogues are taking place. In fact, only yesterday there was this whole discussion of the court's decision on the Gyanvapi Mosque, in which it has basically allowed the proceedings to go forward, and made the argument that the 1991 law of places of religious worship will not apply in this case. And so there are discussion taking place, and there were no Muslims who seemed to be interested in engaging in the nuts and bolts of the policy discussions, because they're just broad strokes. No, this is anti-Islam, this is anti-Hindu, this is Muslims, this is genocide. So the fine print of the discussions about the Indian Constitution and the legal implications as why is the 1991 the law of religious places which should not be disturbed, it's 947, why it's not applicable. There are not many Muslim voices on this issue at all. So there is no nuanced dialogue taking place on these religious issues. Occasionally a Muslim person, like for example, if you go to Satya Hindi, you will find day before yesterday, they had this extensive discussion on the madrasa survey that Adityanath Yogi's government is conducting. And interestingly, all the participants in it were Muslims. So what the host did was to bring in a Muslim who was a very prominent journalist, award-winning journalist who actually studied in madrasas and went on. And it was very interesting, the details that were coming out as to how many madrasas are there in UP, how many madrasas are actually funded by the government. We also discovered that the government had promised to provide teachers who would teach science and math at madrasa schools. We also learned that many madrasas are committing fraud by basically stealing the 12,000 rupees a month that is coming from the government to hire science and math teachers. They are not hiring those science and math teachers. They're simply designating former Quran teachers as science and math teachers, and the owners of the madrasas are pocketing the money, which is So there are lots of interesting details that were taking place in this dialogue. But the end of it was to say that it's not just black and white. What the UP government is doing is not just evil, and the madrasa establishment is not entirely undeserving of some criticism. So basically the conclusion was that yes, there is a need for reform of the madrasas very clearly. And so to me, that was fascinating. And I was watching that dialogue. It takes 1.5 hours. I know most people want to share stupid videos on WhatsApp, which are 25 seconds and don't have 1.5 hours to listen to the details. But that is the point of the dialogue, that you have to get into the weeds and understand that. And the more I listen to the dialogue, and these are all Muslims who are participating on Satya Hindi, it is a secular forum that brought Muslims to do it. And the question that kept popping in my mind is, where are the Indian Muslim organizations? And I go and see Indian Muslims on the digital platform, and they are not discussing the issues that affect their own community. Maybe they feel that they don't have the freedom of speech in India today. And so all the critical dialogues are taking place in forums that are being provided by secular Hindus. Whether it is the Wire, whether it is the print, or whether it is Satya Hindi or Lalan Top or any of these things. So please familiarize yourself with those sources.
Thank you. Fazal bhai, you're next.
Thank you for the very enlightening talk. I have been able to hear your talks on YouTube as well. But I was struck by one of your comments, which I'm surprised, when you said that Hindus, regardless of any party, they talk about India, but Muslims don't. I take objection to that, actually, the number one. Number two,
what are you objecting to? That Hindus talk? Or
no, I'm objecting to that Muslims don't, they talk only about themselves.
Okay.
Muslims do talk about
but you're
India.
conceding that Hindus talk about what is good for India.
And Muslims also talk about what is good for India. However, if there are fringe elements, just keep in mind that when you're backing against the wall, you try to save yourself, not the wall. So if there are something like that, have you ever thought that why? Because this is not a very good statement to make and paint the community that they think about themselves only and not about India.
Can I answer the question? So there are two things. Look, if you are disagreeing with my claim, then why are you asking me why? Why do you think they are not talking about India? That is an irrelevant question. If Indian Muslims are deeply engaged in a robust dialogue about the future of India. So for example, the SCO took place this week. India was there. Show me a forum I look forward to in the next week where you can send me a link, a video, an article where Indian Muslims as a community are discussing the future of India's role in Central Asia. What is good for India? Should it be part of SCO or should it be part of Quad? Or should it try to run with both? This is an important critical question for India today. Show me. There's only one Muslim who's talking about that and you're looking at him. So show me that debate.
Well, I'm not here to debate with you.
I heard your question. Let me finish. No.
Let
me finish my answer first.
Hear me out. I am not.
Let me finish the answer. I heard you. Let me finish the answer. I was at ISNA just now. Attended 6 panels.
I'm not here to debate with you here in this forum. All I said that I take offense to your statement.
Okay, I got the point. You can take offense.
And let's finish there.
No, I will not let that go because you are questioning a fact. And if you're offended, it's like me saying that Indian Muslims are not represented in the Indian parliament. And if you say I'm offended by that, no, that's not. I will show you the data.
No, you are taking different path. I mean, I
My
said what I
question to you
said.
is very simple,
Your
sir.
fact is your
I
fact.
just participated in, I heard 6 panels of Indian Muslims at ISNA just 2 weeks ago. None of them were discussing the future of India. They were all talking only about Indian Muslims. Where in India are Muslims talking about India's inflation problem, India's COVID-related problem?
There are other people ready to ask the question. I don't want to argue about this.
Okay. Fadal bhai,
Thank you so much for your answer.
All right. So Fadal bhai, let me clarify. If you have asked a question, maybe you disagree with him. So don't want to let him answer that question as he wants to?
No, Razi, I got his answer.
Okay, that's fine then.
It's not that I don't want his answer. I got his answer.
Muqtedar Saab, let's move
That's
on.
it.
I didn't
Okay.
finish my answer.
Thank
I don't
you.
know how he got my answer.
Mr. Rudranshu, you are next. Go
I
ahead.
think there's a Bluetooth connection from my head to his head. I didn't finish
It's
my
all right,
answer. I don't know how he got it.
It's all right, Muqtedar Saab.
Rudranshu?
The lecture was very enlightening indeed, but my question is to Professor Muqtedar Khan, and he made a statement, if I could hear him correctly, that the Muslims will have to offer something which thrills the Hindu nationalists to enter or to start up a dialogue, if I could listen to him correctly. But then I feel that the champions of Hindutva can only be thrilled by 2 things. If all the Indian Muslims migrate to Pakistan, or all of them are ready, or the majority of them are ready to convert to Hindu religion. That is the only thing that they can be happy about. And I don't think that this is the time, or this is the right time to start a dialogue between the Hindus and the Muslims, because the Hindu nationalism is not interested in engaging in any sort of a dialogue with the Muslims. So
Is this a question?
So he has misrepresented my comment, so I'll clarify that. There is no question there. It's just a statement. My closing observation was that I didn't say that Muslims have to do this. I said a solution would be if Indian Muslims can offer a vision of India that appeals to Hindus. If they can imagine an India which all Indians would love to live in, like I said, to say, oh my God, your vision of India is so great. I would love. I have given TED Talks about America. I have a vision of America which lots of Americans love it. They find it amazing. My whole book on Ihsan, and whenever I talk about it, I talk about how to apply Ihsan in America, and people love it. And I don't know why Indian Muslims can't talk about justice, can't talk about Rahma, can't talk about Ihsan, can't talk about respect for other people. All of these are in the Quran. They just have to just recite these verses of the Quran which talk about justice. The Quran teaches that if you want, in the interest of justice, stand up against your own community. So if you don't want to think, so if you're saying that this is not a point for dialogue, then that's fine. I mean, I don't know why you wasted your time listening to me, because I believe that this is the time for a dialogue. If you don't have a dialogue, remember this, when the talking stops, the shooting starts. When the talking stops, the shooting starts.
So don't you think that
when the talking starts?
That the time,
the dialogue.
The time
so
for the
you can wait
was
for
when,
time. I don't know. I think we should have a dialogue now.
May I interject, please? Let's keep this as a question and answer and not make it a debate platform, please. Otherwise,
yes, thank
I
you.
will not be able to get through all the people
I
who
will
want to ask the
appreciate that.
question.
I'll appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Osama, you're next.
Yes, sir. I just wondered about the reasons why there is such an absence of debate. I think we get right down to the way It has been for centuries. The Darshan is army, other than as opposed to Mahabharata, which makes you debate about the actions with father and son returning from a play, and then they would debate. This is a moral training happening there. Think for yourself. Think for yourself. Now discover the truth for yourself rather than "Ghot ke pee lo," drink it well. The best student is the one who regurgitates totally, 100% without. That's the tradition from Hadith. I mean, strange echoes. I'll stop there.
So, in answer to Sama Sahib's comment, about a month ago, Mohan Bhagwat made an interesting observation in which he said that why are we trying to find statues in every mosque? And he says Hindutva is unthinkable without Muslims. This is the leader of the RSS making a point. And there was a lot of discussions about it on non-Muslim forums. And secular Muslims have debated. There are people who are very critical of RSS who have been asking the questions, does it say that there's a divide between Modi and Mohan Bhagwat? And then there are some people who believe that, the Hindutva movement has always played good cop, bad cop. So when, Advani used to be the bad cop and Vajpayee used to be the good cop, and now Bhagwat is playing good cop and Modi plays the bad cop. But there are analytical discussions going on. But what is also interesting is that one of the questions that kept hanging up is that, why don't you go and ask Bhagwat what he meant by that? And why isn't any Muslim responding and asking Mohan Bhagwat, what did you mean by that? I actually did a whole video talking to the other spokesperson who repeated that at a major forum. I'm forgetting his name now. He's a very prominent Hindutva intellectual. I actually made a video calling him to have a dialogue and explain to me what Mohan Bhagwat did. And I tweeted it to him, and I'm assuming he saw it, but he thinks that I'm irrelevant and so will not have a dialogue. Perhaps there are other Muslims who can open this dialogue with RSS. And to me, the most interesting question that was raised as a consequence of Mohan Bhagwat's comments was that if RSS claims to be a nationalist organization, then why does it exclude Muslims from membership? And that's where RSS now suddenly started playing on the back foot and saying that, look, if you're a national, you care about Indians, not about religion, then great. Muslims are Indians too. So why are you excluding Indian Muslims from a nationalist organization? It's a very, very good question. And we need to push that. And the inability of RSS to give an answer to that will at least show those Hindus who are on the margins of the secular Hindutva divide that RSS is more sinister than it appears to be. And therefore, you might actually expand the sphere of secular Hindus and shrink the sphere of Hindutva. But the point is that simply assume that we should not have a dialogue because all they want is 250 million Muslims to die or go to Pakistan. I mean, I don't know what to say to that. So the point is that we need to have a dialogue. That's the whole point. I'm talking about how to have a dialogue. I'm assuming that most people understand the need to have a dialogue.
Thank you. Mr. Wasim, you're next.
Thank you. First of all, great discussion and presenters, Professor Khan and Dr. Nazir gave a very thorough, deep understanding and analysis of not just the current affairs.
Please ask the question.
So the question really is, it's a very complex issue. Unfortunately, Muslims lack resources, especially Indian Muslims. So I believe in institutionalization. I think it was already referred to by Professor Khan. What initiatives this group like this can put in place? So we develop resources, and there are plenty of Indian Muslims living in Middle East, and here, if they can't contribute to ideas, they can contribute where very well trained people who are articulate, who are experts in these fields and areas can bring in on regular sustained basis those ideas that need to be, whether it is engaging in how to engage in dialogue, conflict resolution, and all those great ideas can be presented on a regular basis and mobilize the masses and the language. And there's plenty of course, IT resources available. We have all kind of social media available, but we need dedicated resources, people who can do it. If you're a busy person who's doing very well in his career, you can definitely spare some money. And if let's say even I don't know,
I think
100,000 people
you have done
contribute
your
a little bit.
question.
So the
Can we
question is
close it,
really,
please?
is this forum planning to focus on this and encourage and promote a sustained institutionalization?
Thank you.
Look, I understand that resources are always in demand, and even America, the richest country in the world, is running a deficit on debt. So resources are always a problem. But I think American Muslims who are looking for a way to help the situation in Indian Muslims do have the resources to get. I don't know why we are spoiling for a fight here. Let me tell you something very clearly, that the American Muslims have lost the fight with the Jewish lobby that they fought over Palestinian issue in the last 30 years. The Abrahamic Accords have marginalized the Palestinian issue. Nobody cares about the Palestinian issue, even in the Arab world now. And we lost to the Israeli lobby, which was far more influential, far more wealthy than we are. Now, a segment of that American Muslim community, which is the Indian Muslim community, which is not the most powerful element of the American Muslim community. We are probably 10% to 15% of the American Muslim community. This small segment wants to take out the Hindutva lobby and the Jewish lobby, which are working in concert in this country. Yes, you will have small victories like we had in New Jersey because they did something very profoundly stupid. But they are learning, and they are learning fast. So, for example, when Modi appointed, I forget the name of the guy, somebody who was a known Hindutva advocate in the US as an outreach person for Muslims, there was a lot of uproar and engagement after him, and Biden changed the person. And guess what happened? That person now works in the DHS. We didn't get rid of him. He continues to wield influence in the Biden administration. Sonali Shah's case is another case where you see that there are Muslims with all these petitions out there. And Sonali Shah now has another important place, and she's also in the DHS, Homeland Security. So imagine that you have Hindu nationalists already taking positions deep inside the American state. So if you think you can get into this fight and win, well, all the best to you and others who want to get into this fighting mode with it. But I think a more useful contribution that we can make to Indian Muslim cause is by, I have in my article in Islamic Horizon and my presentation at ISNA identified several things that American Muslims can do, from providing relief during crises, pandemics, etc., to providing legal assistance, etc. there. But one of the things that we could also do, and I think should do, and are better positioned than anybody else to do, is to establish this dialogue. See, what this Washington diaspora is doing is providing the framework for the to some extent, intra-Muslim dialogue on this issue, which is what we are having right now, and see the intensity of it, right? So, because many of these issues have never been discussed before, we just take them for granted, and we need to have this dialogue, you know. So that's one point. The second point that I need to do is that how do you convince to the world? I mean, if you're just going to say, oh, they are like Nazis and they are genocide, everybody's saying that about everybody. And it's not very credible. And the other thing is that there are things that are going on in the Muslim world that we don't talk about. So for example, when Imagine Biden taking Modi aside and saying, what is this thing going on? Why is Nipur Sharma? Why is your spokespersons behaving like this? He will point to what happened to Salman Rushdie here in the US and say, look at them. They're like this. They go around killing people all over the world. And Biden will not know what to say to that. He can't say, forget about what happened in my country. Let's talk about your country. And Modi is going to say exactly the same and say, why? Let's talk about what's happening in your country, what's happening to blacks and so on. So this assumption that we can somehow use American power to crush Hindutva here and there, I don't buy that argument. I think it's a failing strategy, and I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. And if you think that you can somehow harness American power to crush Hindu nationalism in the US, and then in India, good, give it a shot. I think Hindu nationalism has penetrated the Hindu culture, and if you look at movies, if you look at culture, it's all about Hindu nationalism. The latest movie called Brahma Shastra, which is a kind of a reasonably new movie, which is successful, is all about Hindu nationalist themes are being resonating in these movies. It's penetrating. You know, when we talk about Islamists, people say that even those who disagree with Maududi use the language that Maududi introduced. So all the debates between Islamists and non-Islamists, you are using the language of Sayyid Qutb and Maududi. The same thing is happening in India, that increasingly the rest of the country, the so-called secular Hindus, are also getting Hindutvaized. And one of the examples would be that some of the bills that were passed, like the CAA, the 370, where in the Rajya Sabha, where the BJP did not control the upper house of India, but it passed. So increasingly secular Hindus are unwilling to take positions in political arena on this particular issue of Muslim minorities, especially Akhilesh, for example, this so-called secular Hindu that Muslims were dying to vote for in UP. Where was he on the bulldozer issues? Nothing, not a peep from him. So this assumption that, oh, there are 50% Hindus who are not Hindutva and 50% Hindu. These guys who are Hindutva are tremendously motivated, dedicated, they are deeply engaged, and the secular Hindus are not that engaged, as are Muslims on most of these issues.
Okay, thank you. Tariq Bhai, you're next.
I'm sorry, I had to unmute myself. I've got two questions, and I'll make it quick. You mentioned that those Muslims living here, and they enjoying the uniform civil code, and then in India they still want the Muslim personal law and things like that. I've seen the strange dichotomy among the Hindus too. I mean, they do extremely well in United States and Europe and all that. In England, one almost became a prime minister. But most of them, and I'm surprised some of them are very close friends of mine, support Modi and extreme Hindutva movement in India. In India, they want exclusionary politics, while they do extremely well in Europe and United States in the inclusive and cultural culture that exists over here. Second, you talked about the leadership. I notice in India, even secular parties hobnob with stereotypical Muslims and ignore cultivating secular mainstream Muslims. Look at the Shahbano discussion. Secular Muslims were ignored totally, and I'm going to finish. Muslims with long beard, skull caps are cultivated for TV debates. They're on every TV channel in India as they fulfill their roles perfectly and bring higher TRPs. So secular Muslims are ignored. The only time they are acknowledged right now, and they get surprised themselves because some of them don't even call themselves Muslims, that just because of their name and because of their cultural background, all of a sudden they have been fingered as being Muslims, and all of a sudden they have become defensive. And you know what I'm talking about. And those are the two issues I want you to please.
So the first issue that I want to talk to you about is that a lot of Muslims, a lot of Hindus in the West, when they look at Hindutva, they don't look at it as Hindutva, they look at it as India. So for example, I have this very interesting response that I'm getting from Hindus in the last few months. They hate it when I talk about India's domestic politics. They call me all kinds of literally horrible terms. I had to literally work with YouTube to be able to censor Urdu and Hindi galis, basically. And they call me Pakistani, this, that, Mullah Chap, Madrasa Chap, and all kinds of things. But when I talk about Indian foreign policy, they become big fans of it. Because when I look at India and I look at what Indian foreign policy has done, I mean, I recently described in a show that India under Nehru was like Gavaskar playing on the back foot and defensive. And India now plays like Virat Kohli on the front foot and aggressively. Indian foreign policy is very aggressive. Modi in his first term traveled across the world, especially to Muslim countries, to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, etc., has received awards. Whether you like it or not, whatever you want to say, he has served India's national interest by dividing Pakistan from the Arab support. Now the Saudis don't support Pakistan on the Kashmir issue. The Muslim world has abandoned the Kashmir issue. So from an Indian national interest perspective, that is a massive achievement. The fact that America can't do anything in Asia without India, whether it is the Quads or whether it's the I2U2, the new initiative, all the minilateral initiatives, India is central. India is the only country which is going against the US, but the US is not sanctioning it for buying Russian oil, etc. So Indian foreign policy has been very, very successful. It has made India look prominent and important worldwide. And so when Hindus who are proud of their country, India, when they look at that, they are very happy. Plus, some Hindus do not like what the BJP is doing domestically also, but they feel that after 1,000 years or so, for the first time in history, Hindus, after a very long time, have got an opportunity to reclaim their country, the Hindu country, which for 1,000 years was ruled by Muslims and then a couple of 100 years by Christians. And so they feel that this is such a great historical opportunity for us to reclaim and revive our tradition. Every country wants to have Muslims who are 65% in Malaysia want to have an Islamic state. Why can't Hindus who are 80% in India have a Hindu state? So they feel that this is a historical opportunity. And if it means breaking some eggs in order to achieve that goal, why not? So these are the two sentiments. And I think the latter point that I made is with sensible, educated Hindus who are tolerating Bajrang Dal and other rubbish nonsense to pursue the vision of RSS. And Muslims and Hindus in the West, they are very happy that India is rising. And so they feel proud to be an Indian of Indian origin. They're talking more about, look, every CEO of a major company is India. The second richest man in the world is an Indian. You can look at Adani that way, or you can look at Adani as, you know, he's the guy who's buying India and Modi is selling it. But so I think that you should not assume the same. It's the analogy of those double standards are very different. We have a theological opposition to uniform civil code in India, and we don't have the same opposition to it here in the US, which is very different from Hindus feeling proud. My question to you is, why aren't Indian Muslims proud of the fact that Indians are doing so well in the world today?
Thank you. Amir bhai, you're next.
Thank you. Professor Muqtedar Khan, I have a question for you and a brief comment. I'm very intrigued by your idea of intra-Muslim dialogue in Switzerland, of all places. I'm not sure what your further vision is, because even if you have, firstly, it's very, very difficult to have a consensus within the Muslim community of India. As you know, it's a spectrum from one end to the other. Even if you reach a consensus, how are you going to implement in India? I'll make sure there's a manifesto. I assume you only want to focus on Indian Muslim issues, not the global Indian issues. So do you visualize that there will be a party that will adopt this manifesto from the Muslims or Muslims become a part of the Congress party or whatever other party in India to promote that vision? Because we seem to stop there and don't go further. My other brief comment is that in the end, you brought in rather irrelevant issues of Palestine and Muslims in America having lost the battle. Firstly, ultimately, the countries follow their own national interest, regardless. We have in India and Pakistan this vision that Muslims should go with the Muslim. It isn't. It doesn't work. Now, the people who are more supportive of Israel are the Arabs, Middle Eastern. As you know, there are diplomatic connections. They are exploiting, taking advantage of all what Israel has to offer. Thank you very much.
Very quickly to the second part is, look, we define American interests. In the US, the consensus is that Israeli security is US interest. That is where the debate is. And so we are allowed, we have the freedom to engage, and we have done that for 30 years. I've written books on this, probably more than 100 articles on this issue, trying to argue that it is also in the United States' interest to ensure that the Palestinians get their human rights. And we lost that debate. Biden, who says that human rights are central to his foreign policies, who is ready to make Saudi Arabia a pariah because the Saudis killed one Saudi journalist, but when the Israelis kill an American journalist, he has nothing to say because she is of Palestinian origin. So that clearly shows that even America is willing to compromise its own values in order to preserve Israel's security. That is the victory of the Israeli lobby. Now, as far as the dialogue is concerned, yes, I agree with you that it is very, very difficult to have a dialogue. So, for example, American Muslims, more than 10, 15 years ago, we had a Shia-Sunni dialogue. I have done khutbas calling for a Shia-Sunni dialogue again after the rise of geosectarianism in the Middle East. But at least in that dialogue that we had, but I don't remember the date, but both the Shia and Sunni Muslim scholars agreed not to abuse each other in the sermons and not to issue statements like they are done in other parts of the world. And more or less, Muslim and Sunni scholars have stuck to that agreement that we have had in the US. So, and then we work together on many issues. So I am pointing to a successful example of a dialogue which was done consciously by American Muslims. Yes, Indian Muslims are very diverse. It's impossible probably to have a platform. The Muslims of Karnataka and Hyderabad are so different from Muslims in UP partly because of their economic status, partly because of the percept. I mean, they live in the Hindutva belt. There are Muslims who don't live in the Hindutva belt, and then the Kashmiri Muslims are an entirely different cup of tea. However, the fact that we don't have a debate does not highlight the diversity among Indian Muslims, and so stereotyping takes place. So a byproduct of an intra-Muslim dialogue would highlight the diversity of Indian Muslims. That alone will deconstruct people. I was so profoundly upset when the Indian cricket team did not make it to the final of the Asia Cup. If Hindus had seen that, would they ever then tell me to go to Pakistan? No, they know that at the heart, I'm an Indian. And when India loses, I suffer. So the need for a public dialogue where Indian Muslims are not just talking about preserving whatever their identity markers are, like the Muslim personal law, or we need to have polygamy, we need to have polygamy. If that's how you're seen, then that's not a good optic. But if you are sitting there and saying, look, we need to ask ourselves, India is surrounded by Muslims, Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc. How can India benefit from its long-term history with Muslims? How can India become a leader of the South? I'm just throwing a couple of suggestions to you. But even to ask ourselves, what can we do to make India a peaceful, secular country, a peaceful, democratic country, and talk about this? And so, for example, Hindus believe that secularism is a code word for appeasement of minorities. And I mean, that is easy to show that there has been no appeasement of minorities, even under the so-called secular government. I think the Congress has been as bad for Muslims as the BJP. If this can be demonstrated, which it can be through data and discussions, etc. So I think the possibility of having an intra-Muslim dialogue, yes, consensus is impossible. Muslims have never been agreed upon. Even before we buried the Prophet, we started disagreeing. Even before the Prophet, peace be upon him, was buried, there was a disagreement in the Muslim community, still continues. So I'm not saying that all of us will agree, but we can have a majoritarian position, like a majority of Muslims. What kind of positions do we have? What are the trends in the community's thinking? Those are important trends that we can point out to. So if we begin to have a dialogue, I think that is more likely than us defeating Hindutva's rising cultural influence. Even if BJP loses elections in 2024, which seems extremely unlikely, even when they lost the number of seats in UP in the recent most election, they got more percentage of votes. It went, I think, from 38, 39 to 41% in UP. So they may have lost some seats, but they got more votes, which is most scary to me. So even if BJP loses the elections in 2024, I think it will not end the rise of Hindu nationalism. Remember, in the 1980s, BJP had 2 seats in the parliament. And look where they got to from that point of view. So this assumption that if BJP loses 40, 50 extra seats and loses absolute majority in the parliament, that's the victory against Hindutva. I'm sorry to say that is not Hindutva. It's a cultural phenomena, and we need to address it that way. It will be there all the time.
All right, Muqtedar Sahab. Faisal?
Ji.
This is the end, okay?
Okay.
And this is your time for prayer also in your mosque, I guess. So sorry to hold you. And we have been here for almost 2 hours. Muqtedar Sahab, you were very engaged and very engaging. And it always happens. Some people disagree, some people agree. But nonetheless, your questions and your ideas are penetrating into minds and hearts. And as far as the dialogue thing is going on, I think on a small scale, I can say that the Indian diaspora is bringing, the whole concept is to bring all people. And across the border, you could see the last previous seminar, people from India, the famous historians, were asking to bring intellectuals from Pakistan and have a dialogue on what are the things that bothers both communities, as Hindus, Muslims, as Indians and Pakistanis. Talk about it. Put something which makes more people more friendly. So you will see in our audience, Hindus, Muslims, women, men, Indian, Pakistanis. That's what dialogue is. You put a platform and the topics and the speakers who could bring all sort of people together and just discuss. That's what we are supposed to do. With this, I thank you all and hope to see you all on Danish Iqbal's event coming week. Please do join. And one of a very popular historian and social activist, Professor Harbans Mukhia, is going to talk most likely on India secularism or India-Pakistan. That's what he talks about on 15th of October. So thank you all again. And